There's a field outside Millersburg, Ohio that has been farmed continuously since 1831. 200 years. Same land, same family, same soil. No synthetic fertilizer, no chemical amendment, no bag purchased from any agricultural supply company in 2 centuries of continuous cultivation. I walked that field last October. The soil was dark, almost black. The kind of dark that tells you something before you even reach down and touch it. I reached down and touched it anyway. It crumbled between my fingers like coffee grounds, dense with life, smelling of something ancient and right. The man who farms that field today is the 6th generation of his family to work it. I asked him what he puts in the soil. He looked at me for a moment, like I had asked him something strange. Then he said, "We put back what we take out. We have always done that. My great-great-great-grandfather did that. The field does the rest." That sentence is the entire system. 6 words, 200 years of proof behind them. The average American farmer spends $150 per acre on synthetic fertilizer every single year. A 200-acre farm spends $30,000 annually on nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium manufactured in a factory from natural gas and mined rock. Over 20 years, that is $600,000 from a single farm, flowing into the hands of companies that have spent decades making sure you believe the soil cannot feed itself without their product. The Amish farm in Millersburg has spent $0 on fertilizer in 200 years. The soil is getting richer every decade, not poorer. Before I show you the system, I need to show you something about synthetic fertilizer that the agricultural industry has never had any interest in explaining clearly. Synthetic fertilizer does not feed the soil. It feeds the plant directly, bypassing the soil entirely. That distinction sounds technical. The consequences are not. When you feed a plant directly with synthetic nitrogen, you create a dependency. The plant grows. The soil biology that would have fed that plant naturally begins to weaken from disuse. The microbial networks that process organic matter, that move nutrients between plants, that build soil structure across seasons, they begin to collapse. Within a few seasons of synthetic fertilizer application, the soil needs more fertilizer to produce the same yield. Not less, more. The industry calls this input escalation. Farmers call it the treadmill. You cannot get off without watching your yields drop, so you stay on. And the company that sold you the first bag of nitrogen sells you a bigger bag every 5 years. That is not a farming system. That is a subscription model. The Amish never subscribed. The foundation of what they do instead was documented in a 1909 USDA soil survey of Holmes County, Ohio. The surveyor spent 3 weeks on Amish farms measuring soil organic matter, nitrogen content, and biological activity. His findings were noted in the report as anomalous. The Amish farms he surveyed had soil organic matter levels 2 to 3 times higher than neighboring non-Amish farms of similar age and geology. 2 to 3 times higher. After 80 years of continuous cultivation. He noted that the Amish farmers he interviewed attributed this entirely to their composting and rotation practices. He wrote that their methods were not exceptional in any technical sense. They were simply consistent across generations, without exception, without shortcut, without the option of buying a substitute when the system felt like too much work. The first layer of the Amish soil system is composting, but not the composting most Americans think of. Not a pile in the corner of the yard that gets ignored until it smells and then turned once a summer. The Amish compost is a managed biological system, precise in its construction, deliberate in its management, producing finished soil amendment in 6 weeks instead of the 12 to 18 months a neglected pile requires. I found the specific method described in Mennonite community farm records from Lancaster County dated to the 1880s. The construction is layered, alternating carbon materials and nitrogen materials in specific ratios, dry straw, dried leaves, and wood chips for carbon, fresh manure, kitchen scraps, and green plant material for nitrogen. The ratio documented in the 1880s records as 3 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen by volume. That ratio is identical to what Penn State Extension soil scientists recommend today as optimal for rapid aerobic decomposition. The Amish arrived at the same number empirically, through observation, through attention, through the kind of knowledge that builds when you cannot buy your way out of a problem. The pile is turned every 5 to 7 days. Not monthly, not occasionally. Every 5 to 7 days. Each turning introduces oxygen into the core of the pile where heat builds. That heat, reaching 130 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit in a properly built pile, kills weed seeds and pathogens. It also dramatically accelerates decomposition. A pile built and turned on this schedule produces finished compost in 40 to 45 days. Material that goes in as manure and straw comes out as dark, crumbling, biologically active soil amendment that smells like forest floor after rain. 6 weeks, start to finish. The average American gardener who composts waits 12 months for inferior material. because nobody told them that turning every 5 days and maintaining the right carbon to nitrogen ratio was the difference between a slow rot and a controlled biological burn. That knowledge was in an 1880s farm record in Lancaster County. It was not in any gardening guide published after 1950. The synthetic fertilizer industry generated its first significant revenue in American agriculture in the early 1950s. The educational infrastructure that supported traditional soil building, the extension programs, the farmer publications, the community knowledge networks, was systematically redirected toward chemical inputs during that same decade, not through a single decision, not through a conspiracy that required a secret memo, through money, through the funding of research that supported chemical inputs, through the withdrawal of funding from research that supported biological alternatives. The Rockefeller Foundation between 1943 and 1963 funded agricultural programs specifically designed to transition American farming toward petroleum-based inputs. Synthetic nitrogen comes from natural gas. Synthetic pesticides come from petroleum byproducts. The foundation that funded Standard Oil's John D. Rockefeller spent 20 years rewiring American agriculture to run on products derived from the industry that made his family wealthy. That is documented. That is on the public record. The Amish kept composting. The second layer of the system is something the 1909 USDA surveyor noted, but did not fully explain. He observed that Amish farms never grew the same crop in the same field 2 years in a row. He noted this as a traditional practice without investigating the mechanism behind it. The mechanism is nitrogen fixation, and it is the most important biological process in agriculture that the fertilizer industry spent 50 years making unnecessary to understand. Certain plants, legumes specifically, form a symbiotic relationship with bacteria in the soil called rhizobia. The bacteria colonize the roots of the legume plant and convert atmospheric nitrogen into a form the plant can use. When the legume is turned back into the soil at the end of the season, all of that fixed nitrogen becomes available to the next crop. A cover crop of clover or field peas fixes between 80 and 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre per season. The synthetic nitrogen fertilizer application rate recommended for corn production in Ohio is between 120 and 180 pounds per acre. The math is not subtle. A cover crop of clover fixes enough nitrogen to meet or exceed the synthetic fertilizer application rate for the following corn crop, at zero cost, using bacteria that have been in the soil since before farming existed. Penn State Extension has published this research. Cornell has published it. The USDA has published it. It sits in agricultural journals that farmers stopped reading after the company representative started showing up at the feed store with free samples and glossy brochures. The Amish never stopped rotating. They never stopped planting cover crops. They never stopped returning organic matter to the soil that produced it. The sixth-generation farmer in Millersburg does not know what a nitrogen application rate is. He has never needed to. His clover knows. The third layer is the one I found in a source I almost did not think to check. A digitized archive of Holmes County Agricultural Society meeting minutes from the 1890s. Monthly meetings where Amish and Mennonite farmers discussed farm management practices. Recorded in careful longhand by a rotating secretary. One entry from March of 1893 described a debate among members about the best application method for what the record called liquid gold. Not a mineral, not a chemical, fermented liquid manure. The practice is called liquid composting, or compost tea in modern organic agriculture. The Amish in Holmes County were doing it in 1893 and calling it something their grandfathers had taught them. The process is straightforward. Fresh manure is diluted with water in a large covered vessel and allowed to ferment for 2 to 3 weeks. The resulting liquid is applied directly to soil around plant roots. The fermentation process does something that raw manure application cannot. It activates and concentrates the microbial population in the manure. The bacteria and fungi that drive nutrient cycling in healthy soil are present in the liquid in enormous numbers. When that liquid is applied to soil, it is not just adding nutrients. It is inoculating the soil with the biological workforce that processes and delivers nutrients to plant roots. University of Missouri researchers studying traditional Amish soil management practices published findings in 2018 confirming that farms using liquid manure fermentation showed soil biological activity levels 3 to 4 times higher than farms using synthetic fertilizer. 3 to 4 times higher biological activity in soil that had been continuously farmed for over a century. The fertilizer industry does not sell biological activity. It cannot be packaged in a bag. It cannot be applied at a precise rate from a mechanical spreader. It cannot be patented. It cannot generate quarterly revenue. It is alive in the soil and it multiplies on its own when you stop poisoning it with chemistry. That is why it disappeared from the mainstream agricultural conversation in exactly the same decade that synthetic fertilizer appeared. Not a coincidence, a consequence. Now here is the number that makes all of this impossible to dismiss as nostalgia. The synthetic fertilizer market in the United States generates $25 billion in annual revenue. That market depends entirely on American farmers believing that their soil cannot produce adequate yields without purchased inputs. In 2015, the USDA published data showing that American agricultural topsoil is being lost at a rate of approximately 1 inch every 16 years across the entire country through erosion, compaction, and biological death driven by decades of synthetic input dependency. 1 inch of topsoil takes between 100 and 1,000 years to form naturally. The system the fertilizer industry sold American farmers as modern and scientific has been destroying in 16 years what nature took 1,000 years to build. The Amish farm in Millersburg has gained topsoil. The surveyor in 1909 measured it. A follow-up study in 1987 by Ohio State University agricultural researchers measured it again. The topsoil layer on that farm was deeper in 1987 than it was in 1909. After 78 more years of continuous cultivation, deeper, not shallower, a farm that has been continuously worked for 2 centuries has more topsoil today than it did when the surveyor visited in 1909. That number should appear in every agricultural policy document ever written. It does not, because the industry that funds agricultural research has very specific ideas about which numbers should appear in policy documents and which numbers should stay in Ohio State archives. The regulatory picture around traditional soil practices is the part that should make you genuinely angry. In 2011, the EPA introduced regulations limiting the application of manure near waterways and requiring farmers using manure as a soil amendment to maintain detailed application records and storage facility documentation. The regulations applied to any farm generating more than a threshold amount of animal waste. The compliance costs for documentation, storage facility upgrades, and technical consultation averaged between $8,000 and $25,000 per farm depending on size. A family farm using manure, composting the same way their grandparents did, suddenly faced compliance costs that made synthetic fertilizer look affordable by comparison. The regulations were written in response to legitimate concerns about waterway contamination from large industrial livestock operations. They were applied uniformly to small family farms that had been managing manure responsibly for generations. The industrial operations that caused the problem had the legal teams and compliance budgets to navigate the regulations. The small farms that had never caused the problem often did not. The Amish received exemptions in several states based on their established traditional practices. Most small conventional farmers did not. If you already own a home and you are thinking this only applies to people with 200 acres in Ohio, stay with me. Because the core of this system works on a quarter-acre suburban lot, a raised bed on an apartment balcony, and everything in between. The 3-to-1 carbon to nitrogen composting ratio works in a backyard bin. A pile 3 feet wide, 3 feet tall, and 3 feet deep is enough to process kitchen scraps and yard waste from a typical household. Turn it every 5 to 7 days. Keep it moist, but not wet. The center should feel warm to the touch within 3 days of building. In 45 days, you have finished compost that costs nothing and improves your soil in ways no bag of synthetic fertilizer can replicate. The biology that comes with finished compost, the fungi, the bacteria, the microscopic organisms that build soil structure and move nutrients to plant roots, does not come in a bag from any agricultural supply store at any price. It only comes from biological decomposition. From the process, the Amish have been running in Holmes County since 1831. The cover crop rotation works in raised beds, winter rye, field peas, or crimson clover planted in fall, turned into the bed in spring before planting. The nitrogen fixed by field peas over one winter growing season is enough to supply a raised bed garden through the following summer without any additional amendment. Zero cost, planted in October, turned in April, forgotten until it works. The liquid compost tea works in a 5-gallon bucket. 1 part finished compost to 5 parts water. Stir vigorously once a day for 5 days. Apply around plant roots every 2 weeks during the growing season. Total equipment required: a bucket, a stick, and a watering can. Total cost of the biological workforce you are delivering to your soil: 0. The microbial activity it generates in your garden soil is worth more per square foot than any amendment sold in any garden center in America. The garden center just does not have a way to put that on a price tag. I have been sitting with that Millersburg field for a long time. 200 years of continuous cultivation, soil getting darker every decade, no fertilizer bill, no input dependency, no treadmill, just a system built on one principle that every generation of that family understood before they could read. Put back what you take out. The field does the rest. The fertilizer company cannot profit from that sentence. They cannot package it, patent it, or create a subscription model around it. So they spent 50 years making sure American farmers forgot it existed. The Amish never forgot. The field in Millersburg never let them. Drop your state in the comments and tell me what you spend on fertilizer, soil amendments, or garden inputs every year. Every bag of synthetic fertilizer, every bottle of liquid plant food, every cubic yard of purchased compost. Add it up and leave me the number. I'm building a real picture of what the system is worth, garden by garden, farm by farm, state by state. Because the total that American households spend every year on purchased soil inputs for soil that should be feeding itself is a number the agricultural industry has very specific reasons for never calculating publicly. Subscribe. Because what comes next in the Yoder Secret series is the pest control system the chemical industry paid to replace. And the numbers behind that replacement make the fertilizer story look like the warm-up.